a few enough people, we can quickly go around and introduce ourselves. Why don't we do it while we're waiting here?
Okay.
I'm Peter Moyer. I'm a retired emergency physician. I'm a Brookline Rotarian, and I'm going to co-host this event with Francis Jeffries.
I'm Frances Jeffries, and I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow and working with the Brookline team to advance their calls to action for peace building, and in this case, the abolition of nuclear weapons. Bernard, do you want to take the next?
Yeah, I'm Bernard Green. I've been a member of Brookline Rotary for about 3 years. I am also chair of the Select Board in Brookline, which is the executive body of town government. And I'm a former lawyer, and I have lived on nuclear missile bases in the past.
And live to tell about it.
You lived
Well, yeah, we live to tell about it.
in the West, right? Someplace?
Yeah,
Bernard?
in Montana, and yeah, just Montana.
So I'm Joyce Graff. I'm your tech support tonight. So why don't I just do a roll call? It's sometimes easier than trying to do a round robin since the pictures move around. Karen, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Karen Wetmore from Needham Club, 30+ year member, and I am an accountant who is trying to retire.
Danette, welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Danette Day, and I began a couple of years ago in the Fitchburg Rotary, and I've been invited, and I graciously accepted the invitation to be working on the peace work in the Brookline Rotary, and that has been really exciting. I'm a professor of education, and I have traveled around the world as a part of a military family, but I've never lived on any place that had nuclear expansion going on. So Bernard,
Yeah.
one up on me, buddy.
It's exciting.
Clarice, welcome.
Hi everyone, my name is Clarice and I am a member of the Cambridge Rotary Club, and I was also invited to hear everyone talk today. I joined because my background is in international relations and intelligence studies. Every time there is a talk on peace building, international relations, I'm always interested in learning more. Thank you.
Great.
Good.
And Lois Sokol, please.
My name is Lois Sokol. I was a member of Needham Rotary for many, many years. I'm a retired teacher from the Newton Public Schools. I'm interested in the issues you're talking about, and when the invitation came, I wholeheartedly accepted it. And it makes my heart feel so good to hear a young lady who just spoke out the words she spoke. That is very uplifting for me. So I'm anxious to hear what you're doing. I'm anxious to hear what you're going to be delving into today. Thank you very much for letting me attend.
Good. Good to have you. Okay, I think we should get into it. Ira Helfand is an old friend, actually, of both mine and Francis's, and he's been around the movement to abolish nuclear weapons for a long time. I took a guess when I was thinking about this. 4 decades, is that fair? Or more?
47 years.
47 years, 5 decades. That's all.
You haven't done it yet?
No, very disappointing.
And he's been parts of organizations which have won Nobel Prizes, and he's been the president of and members of Physicians for Social Responsibility and its parent organization internationally. So he's been very active. I've heard him speak many times. He's very urgent, which is appropriate. And he's gotten me into this. As I told Francis the other day, he was the person responsible for inspiring me to get into this movement of trying to get rid of nuclear weapons. So Ira, it's yours.
Thanks. And thank you all for coming. As I'm sure you all appreciate from the topic, this is not going to be a particularly easy conversation that I'm asking you to be part of, but I think it's a really critical one. And, I basically have three messages that I would try to bring to you. One is that we really are in danger of having a nuclear war. This is not some 1980s thing that we read about in history books. This is something that we're facing today. Secondly, if we do have a nuclear war, it's going to be more catastrophic, more terrible than we could possibly imagine. And third, and perhaps most important, it doesn't have to happen. This is up to us. There are lots of things that we can do to try to decrease the chance of there being a nuclear war, and we really need to do those things, both as individuals and I think as Rotarians, for reasons which I'll talk about a little bit later. So let me just address the first point first. You know, the danger of nuclear war. In the 80s, everybody got this. Clarice, you don't remember that, but I think most of the other people on this call do. And it was a terrifying time. We were all afraid that there'd be a nuclear war. It was just pervasive in the culture at the time. There were movies about nuclear war. There were books about nuclear war. There were records, songs. We all had nightmares about nuclear war. And that level of attention and of fear actually was very important and good because it motivated us to get active. And literally millions of people became involved here in the United States in the anti-nuclear movement. Additional millions in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, even in the former Soviet Union. And that pressure had an enormous impact on policymaking. In 1983, the United States deployed Pershing missiles in West Germany with the stated goal of being able to fight and win a nuclear war in Europe. This was a totally crazy idea that you could win, let alone, or even survive a nuclear war. But it was official US policy at the time. And later that year, we almost went to war with the Soviet Union twice, once in September, once in November. It was an extraordinarily, explicitly dangerous time. Less than 2 years later, in 1985, Reagan and Gorbachev sat down together and said nuclear war could never be won and should never be fought. And they ended the Cold War arms race. It was an almost complete victory for the freeze movement of the time, which was demanding an end to the Cold War arms race. And it represented a huge 180-degree change in the nuclear policy of both the United States and the Soviet Union. The problem is that when the Cold War ended in 1989, 1990, depending how you date it, we all, as a civilization, began to act as though the danger had gone away. The danger had decreased. The 1990s were a safer time than the 1980s, although we almost had a nuclear war once then in 1995. But the fundamental problem hadn't gone away. There were still tens of thousands of nuclear warheads. And they were just sitting there, waiting for international relations to go sour again. And that's exactly what's happened. So that in 2018, William Perry, the former Secretary of Defense during the 90s, issued his famous warning that we were closer to nuclear war then in 2018 than we had been even during the worst moments of the Cold War. And he was talking in the context of the US-Russian relations. And it's really important to remember that he gave this warning 4 years before the second Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has dramatically increased the danger between the United States and Russia. We have seen a flood of explicit threats to use nuclear weapons flowing from the Kremlin since 2022. And this is an extraordinarily dangerous and unstable situation. But it's not the only threat, the only reason why we need to be afraid of nuclear war. Relations between the US and China are the worst they have been since the 70s. We're in the middle of a significant and not very pleasant trade war with China. And there is real potential that we will be involved in a military conflict with China over Taiwan in the next couple of years. The situation on the Korean Peninsula is extraordinarily dangerous. There was a moment in 2018 when Kim and Trump had their summits in Singapore and Hanoi when we thought that perhaps the Cuban situation was going to be resolved. Those negotiations failed, and Kim walked away from his encounter with Trump convinced that he needed to build his nuclear arsenal. That was the outcome of those negotiations. And that's what he's done. He's been building his arsenal and building the missiles to deliver those weapons ever since. Now, the South Korean government, looking at the failure of the United States to adequately support Ukraine despite our legal commitment to do so, is talking openly about building nuclear weapons also. And so the danger there in Korea is just really extreme. There is a situation in the Middle East where a nuclear armed Israel and a nuclear wannabe Iran have a very hostile relationship. Before some of you came on, Peter was asking, what's going to happen this weekend? Is the United States going to go to war with Iran again? We don't know. It's certainly a real possibility given the armada that Trump is assembling in that area. So that's a fourth geopolitical flashpoint. And the fifth one is South Asia. And frankly, I think that's the most dangerous of all. India and Pakistan have gone to war 4 times since the 1940s. They had a mini war last May that could easily have escalated to nuclear war, and the underlying issues between them remain completely unresolved. That situation could erupt into conflict again at any time. So, in total, 5 geopolitical flashpoints, that any one of which could lead to a nuclear war. In addition, there are significant developments in cyber technology over the last few years, including the plans to mate artificial intelligence with nuclear command and control systems that insert all kinds of further uncertainties into this process and raise the danger of a cyber accident or cyber terrorism leading to an accidental, if you will, nuclear war. Finally, well, not quite finally, next, there is the climate crisis. People don't often connect these two existential threats in quite this way. But we have to understand that the climate crisis is a key factor driving us towards nuclear war. And it may be the way, nuclear war may be the way that the climate crisis ultimately does us in. As the planet heats up over the next couple of decades, and it is clearly going to do that, even if we today impose all the measures which we should to try to limit that warming, as it heats up over the next couple of decades, large areas are just going to become uninhabitable. And as that happens, people within countries are going to see conflict over scarce resources of food and water. There's going to be conflict between nations over scarce resources of food and water. There's going to be migration on a scale we have never seen in human history. The politics of the United States and Western Europe have been turned upside down by the influx of 5 to 10 million refugees. The best estimates are there'll be 50 to 150 million climate refugees over the next 2 or 3 decades. And as all of these people are forced to go on the move, it's going to create further instability. If nuclear weapons are still available as all of this chaos plays out, the chance of their being used is going to increase dramatically. And finally, there's the potential for an all-out nuclear arms race. I mentioned that the South Koreans are considering acquiring nuclear weapons. They're not alone, largely in response to the perception that the US is no longer a reliable ally. The Japanese are considering nuclear arsenal. The Scandinavian countries are considering acquiring nuclear weapons. Poland is, Germany is. And if any of these countries break ranks, they're all members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If any of them break ranks and start developing a nuclear arsenal, it is highly likely that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey will follow. And, then it's just a free-for-all. And the world is infinitely more dangerous with that many people, that many nations able to start a nuclear conflict. So for all of these reasons, we really have to end the denial, which has been the hallmark of the last 30 years, and accept the fact that nuclear war is a real threat, it's a growing threat, and something which we must start paying more attention to. Given that, I think it's important to remind ourselves of what's at stake, of what's going to happen if these weapons are used. And I want to describe this a bit. I suspect, again, that some of the people who lived through the 80s kind of know this information, but it's been a long time since most of us have thought about it, and I think it's worth refreshing everyone's memory. I want to start by describing what would happen to a big city like Boston in the event of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. Most of us have seen lots of pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, especially last year during the 80th anniversary. And, these pictures are very powerful. and they're scary, and they're an important warning about what nuclear weapons can do. But the thing we really need to understand is they don't begin to prepare us for what's going to happen if there's a nuclear war today. The Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of TNT equivalent, an enormous explosion. But the weapons in the US and Russian arsenal today are between 100 and 800 kilotons, between 60 and 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. And if there's a war between the US and Russia, it's not going to be one bomb on one city. A major target city like Boston will probably be hit with anywhere from 5 to 10 to maybe 15 nuclear warheads, each of which will be 6 to 50 times more powerful than Hiroshima. It is really difficult to envision all these different explosions. And so I'm going to use a model of a single very large explosion. The explosive force in this model, 20 megatons, 20 million tons of TNT, is somewhat greater than we would expect the Boston area would receive. The destruction I'm going to describe is an underestimate because you cause more damage if you use a bunch of smaller weapons and spread them out over the area you're trying to destroy. But it helps us understand the scale of the destruction that we will face. Within 1,000th of a second, a fireball will form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, 4 miles across. Within this entire area, everything will be vaporized. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself will disappear. To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the explosion will generate winds greater than 600 miles per hour. Mechanical forces of that magnitude destroy anything that human beings can build. That's to 4 miles. To 6 miles in every direction, the heat will be so intense that automobiles will melt. And to 16 miles in every direction, the heat will still be so intense that everything flammable will burn. Paper, cloth, plastic, wood, gasoline, heating oil, natural gas, it will all ignite. We will have hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour will coalesce into a giant firestorm, 32 miles across, covering over 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperature will rise to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen will be consumed, and every living thing will die. In the case of Boston, we are talking about a firestorm that extends beyond the 128 Beltway. The death toll would be in the range of 4 to 5 million people, depending on the time of day. In the case of New York or Moscow or Beijing, the death toll would be 12 to 15, maybe 18 million people in a half an hour. And if this were part of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia or China, all of the major cities in these countries would see this kind of destruction. And if NATO were involved, most of the great cities in Canada and Europe would as well. All told, the immediate death toll on the first day would be in the range of something between 100 and 400 million people. Those who survived in the countries which fought the war would find themselves, in a landscape that we cannot imagine. None of the things that we require to keep ourselves alive would be available. There'd be no electric grid, no internet, no cell phones, no public health system, no system for distributing food or distributing gasoline or heating oil. There'd be no law and order. And in the months following this attack, the vast majority of people who survived day one would also die. They would die from starvation, from radiation poisoning, from epidemic disease, from exposure to the elements. But again, this is only a small part of the story. I've just been talking about what happens in the countries that fight the war. But this would be a disaster for the entire planet. A war between just the US and Russia at current levels of deployed weapons. The fires from that war would put enough smoke into the upper atmosphere to block out the sun and drop temperatures across the planet 18 degrees Fahrenheit on average. In the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures would drop 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's colder than it's been on this planet in the last 18,000 years, since the coldest moment of the last ice age. And under these conditions, all of the ecosystems that have developed since the end of that ice age would collapse. Food production across the planet would essentially stop, and the vast majority of the human race would starve to death. A study that was published in the journal Nature in the summer of 2022 showed that in the first 2 years after a war between the United States and Russia, 3/4 of the human race, 6 billion people, would starve to death. That same study also looked at what would happen if India and Pakistan go to war, and found that at the current level of their arsenals, enough smoke would go into the atmosphere to trigger similar climate disruption and famine, not quite as severe, but bad enough to kill 2 billion people in the first 2 years, including 130 million people in the United States and about 4 or 5 million people here in Massachusetts. This is not the plot of a movie that I've been describing. This is the danger which we allow ourselves to live with every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist. And we have to understand that if we do allow these weapons to exist, it is not a question of if, but only a question of when this will happen. We are not here today. We have not survived this far into the nuclear weapons era because we've known what we're doing. It's not because we've had wise leaders or sound military doctrine or perfect technology. We've survived, according to former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, and I'm quoting him, because, quote, we lucked out. It was luck that prevented nuclear war. And we have to understand that the current policy of the United States and the other 8 countries which have nuclear weapons is at heart a hope for perpetual, indefinite good luck. And this is crazy, because we all know that no one's luck lasts forever, and ours won't either. So that's the bad news. And there is a great deal of it, and we need to be cognizant of it. But there's also very, very important good news, which is that none of this needs to happen. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. It is not as though an asteroid is coming at the planet and there's nothing we can do about it. These weapons are little machines that we've built with our own hands. Most warheads are about the size of the chairs we're all sitting in right now. We have dismantled more than 60,000 of them since the height of the Cold War. We know exactly how to dismantle the 12,000 that are left. We could do it in about 3 or 4 years' time. All that is missing is the political will to do that. And that's where we all come in. Because if we're going to survive, we have to create that political will. The 9 countries which have these weapons do not want to give them up. These weapons make them more powerful. They allow them to get their way in the world. And the leadership has convinced itself, perhaps, and certainly most of us, that these weapons also guarantee our safety. Mutually assured destruction, deterrence. It's all stable. It'll all work. We'll never have this kind of a war. That is an extremely dangerous myth. We know of at least 6 occasions during the nuclear weapons era when we have come within minutes of nuclear war, and were saved at the last minute because somebody figured out that the alarm that one country or the other was responding to was a false alarm. We have got to move beyond this current understanding based on the false premise that nuclear weapons make us safe, and build a new security policy based on a correct understanding that nuclear weapons are the greatest threat to our safety, and our security demands that we seek their abolition. Now, internationally, there is a movement that has grown over the last decade and a half, largely led by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which was founded by the physicians movement, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. This campaign sought and secured adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the United Nations in 2017. That treaty has now been signed, but it's been signed by 100 countries, and it has been a real landmark development in the international conversation about nuclear weapons. But the weakness of this treaty is that none of the nuclear armed states are parties to it, and none of them have any intention at this point of joining it. And so our attention now really needs to focus on those countries. And for those of us who live in the United States, that means we need to focus on the policy of our government. In response to that situation in 2017, after the treaty was adopted, we created here in the United States a campaign called Back from the Brink, which is designed to mobilize communities across the country to create a consensus for a new security policy. The key aspect of this campaign is a call for the United States to enter now into negotiations with the other 8 countries that have nuclear weapons for a verifiable, enforceable agreement to eliminate their arsenals according to a specific agreed-upon timetable. The campaign has enjoyed a certain significant amount of success. About, at this point, 500 NGOs have joined the campaign, including most of the national faith communities, most of the largest environmental groups like the Sierra Club and 350.org, many peace and social justice communities. Labor unions have joined this campaign recently, especially here in Massachusetts. Both the Mass Nurses Association and the Mass Teachers Association are partners of this campaign. And we also now have a student group, Students for Nuclear Disarmament, which has chapters on 22 campuses, high school and college both, including, by the way, at Brookline High School, which is one of the flagship chapters of SND. We have gotten...
And city governments, right? Boston, for instance, Boston has passed it as well.
Yes, we've gotten nationally about 70 cities and towns, and here in Massachusetts about 20 have passed resolutions endorsing this campaign, including Boston, Worcester, and Springfield, Brookline, Newton, Cambridge, Somerville, Needham, and many other communities. We have a resolution before the United States Congress that was introduced by Congressman Jim McGovern from the Worcester area. It now has a total of 53 sponsors in the House, which is an enormous number compared to efforts in previous years. The sponsors include 6 members of the delegation from Massachusetts. In addition to McGovern, Congressman Neal, who will be the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee if the Democrats get control of the House. McGovern will be chair of the Rules Committee. Catherine Clark, who is the number 2 Democrat in the House, the Democratic whip, and also Congresswoman Presley and Trahan and Congressman Lynch. We have a resolution in the Senate that was introduced by Senator Markey and is also co-sponsored by Senator Warren and by 7 other senators nationally. And we have a resolution before the state legislature in Massachusetts, which is currently bottled up in committee. And that is one thing that we can all work on actively. The resolution is S1649. It was passed out of the committee that it was referred to last fall in December, got finally assigned in January to the Rules Committee, which needs to either advance it or not advance it to the floor for a full vote. And it's sitting there. And one of the very specific things that I would ask you all to do is to contact Senator Joan Lovely. And at some point, I'll get her phone number and email address into the chat and urge her to bring this before the committee for a vote. The way the Massachusetts legislature works is that most resolutions and most bills never get voted out of committee. They go to committee and they just sit there. And this is totally up to her. If she decides to bring it to her committee for a vote, it will be voted on. And if it is, I'm sure it will pass. And if it goes to the full Senate, I'm sure it will pass there too. We have passed resolutions in the Maine Senate, both houses in Rhode Island, the New Jersey Assembly, both houses in Oregon, both houses in California. Every place has been brought to a vote. It has passed overwhelmingly. The city council vote in Boston was unanimous. In Worcester, it was unanimous. In Springfield, it was unanimous. There is support for this when we can get people to pay attention to it. So those are some of the very specific things that as citizens we can do. As Rotarians, I think we also have a particular role to play. You know, when I give this talk to a general audience, part of the reaction that most people have is, look, you've just described this incredibly huge problem. What do you expect me to do about this? I'm one little person. Well, Rotarians, as Rotarians, we are not one little person. We belong to a global network that has 1,400,000 members. There are chapters of Rotary, clubs of Rotary in almost every country on the planet. And if we could get Rotary as an organization to take a stand on this, we can have a gigantic impact. The Rotary Foundation has already done that. It decided 3 years ago to divest from companies which are involved in the manufacture of nuclear weapons. But Rotary International has not taken a position. And in fact, when we introduced a resolution to the Council on Resolutions last year, the staff leadership in Evanston got the resolution thrown out. They wouldn't let it be discussed or voted on. So I think we need to change that. We need to convince the Rotary leadership that this is an issue which demands Rotary's attention. We can no longer afford as an organization to ignore it. I spoke to a club on the West Coast by Zoom on Tuesday. That club is planning now to join the Back from the Brink campaign and to communicate that to Evanston. Well, they have to take a final vote on it, but that was the discussion on the call. I would hope that the Brookline Rotary and the Cambridge Rotary and the Needham Rotary would all join the Back from the Brink campaign and send a message to Rotary that they think that Rotary needs as an organization to take a position on this. So let me just, a couple of final words and then I'll stop. I've been talking for probably too long, but I just want to say this. This is a very heavy message that we're talking about today. It is a huge responsibility that we all have. If we know that the entire world is at risk and we know that we can do something about it, there's a responsibility to take action. You know, you can't, if you see somebody fall down on the street, you can't just walk over them. You have to help them up. We feel that responsibility, I think, is a burden, and it is something of a burden. But I think we need to look at it from a different perspective. Each one of us wants to do good with our life. It's part of the reason why we joined Rotary, to put service before self. We have been given the opportunity to save the entire world. There is nothing better that anyone can ever do with his or her life. And I hope you all will become involved, if you're not already, in this work, in that spirit. No one of us is going to solve this problem alone, but each one of us needs to do that part of the job which we can do. And if we all do that, especially if we're able to mobilize Rotary to help us do that, I think we're going to be successful. And I think we're going to be successful in the fairly near future. And there's going to come a day, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 8 years from now, we're all going to be able to look in the mirror and say, honestly, I helped save the world. And that is going to be a very good day. So again, apologies for speaking so long. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions people have. And even more, I'd love to hear your thoughts and about what you can do individually, what Rotary can do, and so on.
Question? Thank you very much, Ira. That was excellent. Questions, anybody, or comments? Yes, Arnie and Bernard.
Do you think we have to work on Rotary districts versus clubs?
I've been a Rotarian for about 10 years now, and I still am not quite sure how you make the Rotary system work. I think the first step, I guess, is clubs taking a position and then asking the district to also take a position. But I think it would be fully appropriate for each of the clubs represented here to individually take a position on this, both to the outside world by getting involved with the Back from the Brink campaign, and also within Rotary by urging Rotary International Board to take action on this. You know, the situation is quite similar in some ways to what it was around climate. About 10, 12 years ago, Rotary in Evanston just thought it was terrible to talk about climate. We couldn't do it. It was too controversial. This has become a mainstream issue now across Rotary. Everyone knows that Rotary is working to prevent the climate crisis. And it's one of our prouder accomplishments. And I think that the same dynamic will play out around the nuclear weapons issue, but we need to move that process along because it's moving too slowly.
Thank you.
Bernard?
Yeah. I don't really have my thoughts organized yet, but I will say that if you thought that the 80s were a frightening period of time, I grew up in the 50s, and I remember jumping into ditches as nuclear war exercises. Any rate, all this sounds good. I mean, yeah, I'm always sort of skeptical of big, broad, ideas that don't include the small steps to get to them. And I guess, I remember, the campaign that Senator Clark initiated in the 1960s, I think. And that resulted in the beginning of nuclear weapons limitation treaties. SALT treaty, and then much later START. And I guess and maybe I'm just not understanding this. I just don't see that small step, the small steps that we need to take, other than resolutions and things like that may or may not be helpful. That's not very coherent, I know, but I'm just trying to articulate that. The fact that nuclear war is scary is not enough to motivate a lot of people.
Are you talking about small steps at the individual level or small steps at the government policy level?
Well, for example, a small step was to put pressure on, I guess, was it the Kennedy administration? No, not Kennedy administration. And I forgot the chronology, but small steps that resulted in the first START treaty or SALT treaty. What small steps do we need now? I mean, for example, the loose discussion of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons modernization is something that should be addressed, because it's when you can talk about nuclear weapons or talk about things like this easily that it becomes more likely that you'll actually do it, or actually accept the idea that nuclear weapons or a nuclear weapon could be used reasonably. I'm a little unclear, I know, but
I just to respond to that.
I'm a little skeptical of grandiose.
Go ahead, Ira, then Lois has her hand up too. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about being probably the eldest here. I remember a long time ago, and I remember one thing we did, which was powerful. There were groupers from Needham who went down to Washington, and we wrapped the Pentagon. How many of you remember that? We wrapped the Pentagon in anti-nuclear weapon, big things that we made, bigger than ribbons, big cloths. We wrapped the whole Pentagon, got tremendous news for it, tremendous coverage for it. And I think maybe it did have some kind of effect because it energized other people. Last town meeting in Needham that we had last year, we passed an anti-nuclear bill that you mentioned. Needham was on that scale. We did it through town meeting. So it got coverage. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just done on someone's desk. Because I think part of the problem, and I think you're doing a fabulous job with this, is getting the word out and getting people involved, getting the energy moving towards it again. So when you do it like that, in groups like that, I think it's very positive. I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I think it's right, Lois, if I could comment on that. There have been a number of very important, or many very important steps taken here in Massachusetts already. All the different towns that have endorsed the campaign, the many members of the legislature who are on board. The press is starting to pay much more attention to it. There was a very good article just last Saturday, I believe it was, in the Globe. Maybe it was Sunday. about the exploration of New Start and the danger that posed and what we're doing about it. And the more that people can create conversation about this, the better. At this point, all of this activity is basically educational. It's trying to get this issue back on the national agenda. And one very specific thing people can do is to write letters to the editor. The Globe article provides a hook. You can write to the Globe saying, you appreciate the article, and then amplify some aspect of the message in it. As far as steps,
Could you just mention, back from the brain, could you quickly mention the 4 bullets in it? Because Arnie's question, or I guess it was Bernard's question, what are the steps, from abolition of nuclear weapons
Yeah.
and trying to break it into 4 steps?
I will. There are several specific interim things that the U.S. could do while the negotiations proceed. But I think that we have to understand that we're not going to make progress on any of these unless we win the general argument that nuclear weapons must go. We've been trying this step-by-step approach for decades, and we have taken a number of steps. We've decreased from 60,000 warheads to 12,000. The problem is that it only takes 250. That's the number in the India-Pakistan scenario. It only takes 250 to kill a quarter of the human race and destroy human civilization. And we need people to understand that. This is not some pie-in-the-sky goal that we're putting forward, the abolition of nuclear weapons. This is something that is absolutely essential if we're going to survive. And we need to drive that message home to people. Back from the Brink also urges the United States to adopt no first use policy, to take our weapons off hair trigger alert, to end the situation where the President of the United States has unchecked authority to launch nuclear war, and to plan to avoid this plan to spend $1.7 trillion at least over the next 30 years, enhancing every aspect of our nuclear arsenal and feeding into a global nuclear arms race. But those steps aren't going to solve the problem, and we're probably not going to get those steps adopted if people still think nuclear weapons make them safe. What we need to convince people of is the absolute necessity of eliminating these weapons. And frankly, it's not such a big step for the 8 countries to sit down and work out this treaty and get rid of their nuclear weapons. They could do that in the course of, a year of negotiating. There are some issues that would need to be resolved. But this is not some instrumental problem. This is not like the climate crisis that requires us to change almost every facet of the way we live and rebuild the entire global economy. It's a very small decision that needs to be taken. And I think we need to be aware of that too. We should not see this as this huge thing that can never happen, which is the way I think a lot of people look at it. Nuclear weapons, they've been with us for 80 years, they're going to be with us forever. That's how we talked about the Berlin Wall in the 80s. And it came down. And we need to have that same hope that we can bring about this change now, because if we don't, very bad things are going to happen, and we don't have a lot of time.
I know Danette's been waiting. I want to remind us also that there is a Rotary group that meets every other Saturday morning, and it's an international group called Rotarians for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. I put the name and my email in that. We would invite you to join that. As Rotarians, every single one of us is a peace builder. That's our commitment. And we can convene, we can connect people, we can educate, we can engage. And we do that all the time in all our things. There are some concerns that this would be a political issue. I think you can argue that on the education side, and the group would be glad to support you. We've been meeting for about 6 years, and we would welcome your engagement and other people as well. Sorry, Danette.
Thank you so much for your passion, your commitment, your knowledge. And when you said MTA has been a part of this, it struck me that I'm not always aware of what MTA is doing, but I'm close enough to what the union is doing in my building and within the Massachusetts higher education system. So, I had not heard this. And so I went right to their site, and this effort apparently they're backing the Back from the Brink campaign and have a whole website. And they've connected us to like PBS with great materials, like really good materials, high quality materials for teaching youth. And I thought, wow, we don't know about this. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that we always should know everything, but we're talking about AI, we're talking about the change in the higher education, students wanting to get out more quickly into the workforce, less credits to be earned. We're talking about robotics and all those changes that are happening right now in higher education, but I haven't heard any of this. So I think, to remind us that without this coming, this change occurring, none of those other issues will even be problematic if this comes to, happen, if it happens. So I think the timeliness is really important. And I want to thank you for that, because it really makes me feel like I have to talk to my students about it, and I need to talk to my union about it and say, why haven't we been at least discussing this at some places and spaces that will help us to be the advocates that you're asking us to be? Because there are a lot of other things that are on in our minds and are on the forefront of the issues that we have to tackle, but this seems really pressing. So really, thank you. The MTA is already doing great things, and so I'm a part of that, and I feel like, and I didn't know. So the other thing is to re-educate ourselves, even the difference between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. I think sometimes people get that confused. They think, oh, well, we can't do without nuclear energy. No, this isn't about nuclear energy. This is about nuclear weapons. And I think those two things stifle people, stymie people, and they say, well, that's a resource for us to maintain our way of life. And it's like, no, it's not. That's a destructive mechanism. And so I think that's a problem in people's minds too. Have you come up against that? Like, people really don't even know that this isn't about nuclear energy. This is about weaponry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's across the board tremendous lack of information about the nuclear danger. When I talk to young people in particular, smart, well-educated, curious young people, they think there are 100 nuclear warheads in the world,
yeah, instead
of 12,000.
Mm-hmm.
They think that if it's a nuclear war, it's going to be like Hiroshima. And it's not their fault. They've never been taught this stuff. It's our fault. We haven't taught them. I didn't know that they had put the PBS material on the website. The resolution that they passed was they were going to send that out to all 117,000 members, letting them know that the resolution had passed and providing a link to the PBS material. Mm-hmm. We've been trying really hard to have a conversation with Max Page, the president of MTA, to encourage him to do more with this mandate that he has with the passing of this resolution. And the final thing I would say is there's going to be a really excellent conference on April 25th and 26th in Cambridge at the ICADA Center, which is in Harvard Square, about for teachers. The PBS people will be involved in it, and it's basically a 2-day conference on how to teach about nuclear weapons issues to high school students. And if any of you, Danette, or if any of the others of you are teachers who might be interested in that, I put my email in the chat. Write to me, and I'll get the information to you about how to register for it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Ira, can you comment on deterrence? Countries argue they have to have a weapon in order to defend themselves.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that, Peter, because it's really important. The support for our nuclear arsenal comes from two sources. There is a very self-interested group of people who are coming from companies that make these weapons and delivery systems, who are supporting this for the worst possible motives, which is that they're just going to make a lot of money off of it. Then there's huge numbers of people in the population who support our nuclear arsenal because they think that it makes us safe. They think that deterrence is essential to our national security. And there are a number of things that people need to understand about deterrence. The first, and it's not the most important, but let me just get this out of the way, is that that's not the only reason we have nuclear weapons. And our nuclear policy is very explicit about this. People think that we only have nuclear weapons to deter other countries like Russia from attacking us. We explicitly reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in a wide range of scenarios, even against countries which don't have nuclear weapons, and to use them first. Our nuclear policy has always been about maintaining a nuclear warfighting posture, the ability to use these weapons to coerce other countries to do what we want them to. So it's not just deterrence. As far as the defensive aspect of deterrence, we also have to understand that deterrence we take it as a given. I mean, it's treated like dogma. If you talk to the politicians in Washington, they can't imagine a world without nuclear deterrence. Well, this is a theory that no country would attack us because we have nuclear weapons. History contradicts that. As I said earlier, and I should probably have talked about it in a little bit more detail, we know of at least 6 instances when either the United States or Russia, previously the Soviet Union, actually began the process of launching their nuclear arsenal, something which deterrence theory says should never happen, always in the mistaken belief they were under attack by the other side. And on each of these occasions, a false alarm brought us to within minutes of nuclear war. This isn't supposed to happen, according to deterrence theory. This is never supposed to happen. We know of 6 occasions, and there have probably been more. These are the ones that have made it into the public domain. So, again, it is not deterrence that has prevented nuclear war so far. We really do need to go back to McNamara's formulation, which I think is much more accurate. We've just been lucky. And, if you look at it from that perspective, all of deterrence arguments, I think, really kind of evaporate. Part of the whole problem is that the policymakers, when they talk about nuclear policy, if you listen to them, it sounds like they're playing some complicated game of 3-dimensional chess. It's all rooted in game theory. And, if the Russians have X, we have to have Y. And it's all completely divorced from reality. The starting point for that conversation ought to be, when the weapons get used, what's going to happen? Because when you start the conversation there, the only conclusion that you can come to is we got to get rid of these things. And instead of figuring out how we maintain a balance of terror for decades into the future, which we know is ultimately going to fail, we should be spending our energy answering the question, how do we get rid of them? To the point you raised before, Bernie, what steps do we need to take to get to zero? And that, of course, is not ever the concern of our government or the Russian government or the Chinese government. Their starting point is, we will maintain a nuclear arsenal forever.
Yeah.
And that flies in the face of the historical experience that they won't last forever. They will be used.
Final comment? Yes, Ernie.
Yeah, I want to thank you for this wonderful discussion. And it came to my mind that in the movie Red October, they stated the fact that in a nuclear age, nuclear weapons are the enemy, not another country.
I think it's a great way of looking at it. It truly is the weapons that are the enemy. And if we have that perspective, I mean, that's, that ultimately is what Reagan and Gorbachev came to understand in the 80s, that they weren't each other's enemy so much as the weapons were the enemy of both. And they had to work together to try to lessen that danger. The other great line from a nuclear war movie is from the movie War Games, where the high school student hacks into the NORAD computers and almost triggers World War III. And the computer tries to win the game of nuclear war. And at the end of the movie, this sort of robotic computer voice says, "This is a very strange game. The only way to win is not to play."
Right.
And I think those are the two, should be our 2 mottos. The weapons are the enemy, and the only way to win is not to play.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you immensely, Ira. I want to comment one thing. Francis and I are going to coordinate another one of these sessions in 2 weeks. So if this is the 19th, it's the 5th of March. And we have yet to figure out exactly what it's going to be, but we will announce it in plenty of time. This was excellent. Thanks, Ira.
Just one final word.
Yeah.
When we have a conversation like this, what happens as soon as it's over is that everyone starts putting this stuff out of mind because it's so unpleasant to think about. And I would just implore you, don't let that happen. We have to hold on to this stuff. We have to pay attention to it. We have to keep it in mind, and we have to act on it. And I do hope that all of the Rotary clubs represented here will consider joining the Back from the Brink campaign, which would give it a huge boost. We have a few Rotary clubs nationally. We don't have a lot, but that would really help to build this campaign. And I do hope that you'll all try to figure out how your Rotary club can communicate to Evanston your support for Rotary taking a strong position as an organization on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the opportunity for you to do some of that through Rotarians for a world free of nuclear weapons. And so you'd have a coalition of folks and some materials to draw from, but we're all working together on this, and the need is immediate.
Thanks, everybody. It was good, excellent session.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Night,
We'll
everyone.
see you March 5th.
Stay well. Stay well.